What's up guys, it's Daniel West here, and welcome back to my channel. Today is part 3 of the Assassin's Creed Odyssey Advanced Tips and Tricks, and this will be the final part, and we will be covering RPG mechanics, build tips, and abilities. Alright, let's get into it. So first things first, before we get into any build tips and other fun aspects of the gear system in this game, we do have to cover some boring stuff, so bear with me. Here you can see a table that I've made. This displays the changes that occurs in gear as you level up in the game. So let's break it down. In all gear, there is a base perk, either Warrior, Assassin, or Hunter. These base perks increase by 2% damage every 10 levels, as shown. You can also see that Legendary gear has the highest base perk damage percentage, followed by Epic, Rare, then Common. This is why you should always have at the bare minimum Rare gear, but I'll explain more on that later. So as we mentioned before, everything gets upgraded in terms of the perks every 10 levels. I wouldn't recommend wasting your hard-earned materials on upgrading any of the gear that you want to upgrade any earlier than that. Materials are actually hard to come by than you think, particularly when you're doing a big jump in levels, so just keep that in mind. Now, the next thing to learn about gear is the other perks that are on a piece of gear. With Legendary and Epic gear, you get 2 additional perks. With Rare gear, you get 1. With Common, you get none. These perks can be completely randomized with all the base engravings in the game. These perks also increase every 10 levels. If you want to figure out how much a perk increases per tier, you can look at a max build like mine, divide the perks by 10 for each tier, then multiply by what level tier category you are. This will be the percentage points on your gear. For example, fire damage goes up to 40% for a max build. You divide that by 10 equals 4% each tier. Tier 6 gear will have 24% fire damage, just to refer back to the table. This is also classified by the 10 dots surrounding each perk. The number of dots colored in will match up with what tier the gear is. So the next thing to note is the damage of the weapon. All weapons have the same DPS regardless of what class they are, either up to the fastest with the daggers or to the slowest with the heavy blunts. There is approximately 80 to 135 DPS difference between each level. You generally start feeling the difference after the weapon level is 3 levels or below the current enemy level. This is only consistent across the same class of weapon, e.g. Epic to Epic, Rare to Rare, in terms of that DPS difference that I mentioned before. There is a big difference with upgrading from Rare to Epic and Epic to Legendary. So that 80 to 135 DPS is only from the same class. Legendary weapons do the most damage, then Epic, then Rare, and Common. Okay, so in regards to armor, armor also increases every level, similar to the regular weapons. And they usually increase by roughly about 45 to 60 armor per level for each item. Now, Warrior armor has more health than Assassin and Hunter armor by a substantial margin. As you can clearly see here, these are both my Hunter and my Assassin helmets are level 99, just like my Warrior one, but they have 241 less armor. That is something to keep in mind. These two will have a substantially less amount of armor than your Warrior one, which I guess makes sense when you think about it. But yes, that's consistent across all bits of gear. Warrior will always have substantially more armor than Assassin and Hunter armor. So now that we've gone through the boring stuff, now it's time for the actual tips. Do not remain loyal to gear in the early game. You can change the look of gear through visual customization whilst having completely different stats. Keep up with your weapon levels to match the level of your enemies. You will kill them faster and also be able to have a higher chance of assassinating them, as your base damage will also be higher. In regards to legendary armor sets, they are very static in what their passive perks can do. I'll give you guys an example. So with this Arena Fighters set, you do get that 50% health restored by the overpowered abilities, which is cool. However, the perks might not be what you want for your specific build. For example, damage with swords and daggers, you might not use those. Damage with heavy weapons, you definitely most likely won't use those. Damage with overpowered abilities is good. Damage with overpowered abilities is good, but damage with spears and staves. So let's say you're running a sword and a spear. That perk there is going to be obsolete to you, and you can't change that. Whereas the advantage of Epic gear is you can continually get randomized gear until you get gear that you want. Legendary gear is very static, and you can only add 1 engraving to these guys. That's why I personally never touched them throughout my playthrough, choosing to be more specified to the build that I want rather than using these legendary perks. You can also engrave a slightly weaker overall perk. So all these legendary sets get an additional engraving that goes in here. And it's a smaller amount than the whole set perk, don't get me wrong. However, you won't really notice that much of a difference. And you can engrave these onto any piece of gear that you want. So that's a massive advantage. So a lot of these will be like 50% or 30% or 40% with the full set, but the set might suck. So that's just something to keep in mind. I would stay away from legendary sets if I was you, but again, play how you want. As mentioned before, in order of attack speed, it goes daggers, swords, staffs, spears, heavy blades, heavy blunts. As mentioned in a previous video, I'll mention it again. I would recommend having one faster attacking weapon and one slower but more damage per hit weapon. Up to you on this one. I like the sword staff and dagger spear for my two builds. The perk crit chance is the holy grail in this game, particularly for assassin builds. The more crit chance you have, the more likely you can base assassinate people rather than wasting adrenaline segments on critical assassinations. When you get near someone, your base assassination damage will show up on the health bar. Critical damage will most of the time double that, or sometimes up to triple the damage on a base assassination. This is why it is important to have the highest odds of critical chance. Unfortunately, it's damn near impossible to get 100% crit chance before level 90s, but once you do, it is amazing. And crit chance also transferred to open combat as well, so your base attacks whilst in open combat will do more damage too, killing enemies faster. Alright, let's talk about abilities. Now, there are quite a few abilities in this game. I'm not going to run through all of them. I'll let you have a look at them yourself. I'll just be providing my thoughts on what you should have. So to start off with, you should focus more on passive abilities rather than active abilities. What I mean by that is passive abilities are constant perks all the time. Active abilities require you to actually activate them in open combat, and they use adrenaline. So passive abilities include Arrow Master, Archery Master, Weapons Master, Gear Master, Shadow Assassin, and Stealth Master. These will be perks across all of your builds if you have multiple. And another reason why I focus on passive abilities is having multiple ability wheels mid-combat is a pain to alternate, and it just makes it easier just to have one main one. Now, in terms of the ability wheels, you can get 2 in each hunter and each warrior. However, I would recommend only having 1 wheel of each. So 1 wheel of warrior abilities and 1 wheel for hunter abilities. As I mentioned before, alternating between these is a pain. Mid-combat, you could die trying to alternate your wheel by pressing the buttons, try and activate things. Now, in terms of your assassin abilities that are active, they also go on your warrior wheel. So things like the Rush Assassinate, the Hero Strike, those are considered warrior abilities, and they will take up a slot on your warrior wheel. So keep that in mind. Now, in terms of the best warrior abilities to go for, I always recommend getting overpowered attacks because they don't use an ability slot, and it's so good for all weapons. They do massive amounts of damage, and some weapons have these great crowd clearing abilities with overpowered attacks, so yeah, can't complain. They're amazing. Other good warrior abilities include Second Wind, getting more health back. That's a no-brainer. Everyone should have that. Battle Cry of Air Ease, if you're close to death, activating that will prevent you from dying. And the Hero Strike, which is a nice, powerful attack that you can do even while someone's about trying to attack you. And another one for warrior abilities is pick an elemental pathway and stick to it. So pick poison or pick fire. Both are good, but just don't get both. That's a waste of ability points. And also make sure to get the mastery for both so you do more damage and it builds up faster. Now, in terms of hunter abilities, I personally only use 2, but you can add more as you want. But my 2 go-tos are multi-shot. Obviously, as it goes without saying, you can shoot up to 10 enemies at once, which is awesome for conquest battles in particular, do massive damage. And the other one that I go for is Devastating Shot, which is huge amounts of damage in one big shot. Great for taking on bosses, kills them very quickly. And another one, if you really want to have fun with it, is the Predator Shot, where you can like move the arrow through the air to shoot people from far away. That one's fun to have, but I personally don't use it. After level 50, you'll unlock what's called Mastery levels in the abilities menu. These Mastery levels are passive perks that transfer across all of your builds, and you can gradually build them up to be quite substantial increases. Once you get them in level 50, invest in these heavily. Put as many spare ability points into here as possible, as they will be active across all builds like I previously mentioned. My recommendation is anything crit related first, and then put whatever spare points you have into damage to elites and bosses, elemental damage, so whatever damage that you're using, i.e. poison or fire. Yeah, pretty much those are the best ones that I would start with. So in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they actually introduced loadouts in the inventory menu, probably maybe a year or two after the first time releasing it. This was a game changer at the time, as people were constantly trying to find the hybrid jack of all trades build in this game where they could do everything with it, or a little bit of everything. That's no more. You can now have up to 5 different builds to suit your needs. You can change them anywhere, anytime, aside from being in open combat. Yes, this means you can change gear while you hide in a bush away from someone and pop back out with a new build and completely shit on them. But please note, your abilities will stay the same across all builds. So keep this in mind. You can't have assassin abilities only for the assassin build or warrior abilities for a warrior build. So keep this in mind. Make sure that your abilities are jack of all trades. Personally, in this game, I run a max warrior damage build, a max assassin damage build, and for fun, on occasion, I will use a max hunter damage build. For you guys personally, I would start with a warrior and assassin build, so the 2 loadouts. In order to fill these out correctly, you essentially just want all of your gear in each loadout to have the same primary perk that matches your build. E.g., all of your gear should have a warrior damage primary perk for the warrior build, and an assassin damage perk for your assassin build. This way, the builds are great at what they need to do, and nothing else. That concludes our 3-part Assassin's Creed Odyssey Advanced Tips and Tricks series. I had a blast making it for you guys, and I really do believe that there is still more to be talked about, don't get me wrong, but I thought that that would overwhelm you guys too much, as there's just a lot extra mechanics to talk about. So if you would like me to make more videos, please let me know down in the comments if you are more interested. Also, a massive shout out to everyone who's watched my Black Flag video. That's got now 2,500 views. So massive shout out to everyone who's watched that one. Much love. And I will catch you guys in my next YouTube video, whenever that is. Alright, peace out.